Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to today's meeting of the Local Plan Cabinet Advisory Group, both those that are participating and those who are watching on the live stream. If members have technical difficulties during the meeting, please contact the Democratic Services Officer on call, who will attempt to assist you. And today's Democratic Services Officer is Emily Kennedy, and her number is 577046. It will also be at the top of the chat thread for members if you need it. For those of you who are watching the Council's YouTube stream, please follow the instructions below the video if there are any issues with the live feed. I'd ask participants, when you're not speaking, please mute your microphone. This minimises background noise and will help everyone in listening to proceedings. Microphones must only be on if the participant has been granted permission to speak. To gain my permission to speak, please very briefly indicate on the chat to the right side of the screen, and I will then make a note and go back to you once the person speaking has finished. Would everyone please ensure that their mobile phones are turned to silent and they're not used to make or receive phone calls while the meeting's in progress. Please also refrain from checking emails or conducting other business, and ensure that you're in a quiet room free from distractions for the duration of the meeting. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. The meeting will also be recorded and will be subsequently broadcast on the internet. So please can I ask the members of the advisory group to confirm that they're present in the meeting when I read out your name. I will ask for the attendance of any councillors who are participating in order to speak under Council Procedure 20.1 separately, although at the moment I'm not aware of any. So if you could just indicate that you're here. Councillor Bailey?
I'm here. Good evening.
Thank you. Councillor Fellows?
Yeah, here.
Councillor Garner?
I'm here too.
Thank you. Councillor Huxley? No. Councillor Huxley doesn't seem to appear, which is quite strange that she's in the same house as me. I think she is.
Hello, I'm here. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Huxley. Councillor Scobie?
Yes, I'm here.
Councillor Scott?
Yep, here.
Thank you. And Councillor Wright? All right, no Councillor Wright? Okay. Are there any other councillors present that wish to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1? Speak now or forever hold your silence. I don't think there's anyone else here, is there? Okay. So apologies. I've not been notified of any apologies. Declarations of interest. Does anyone have an interest to declare in the items of business on the agenda this evening? Nobody speaks up. So we move on then to the presentation to set the context for the local plan review work, which will be given by Mr. Verrill, the Strategic Planning Manager. Mr. Verrill.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. I hope you are going to be able to see the presentation. You should be seeing it now. Okay. The purpose
I don't think members can see it.
Oh, we can't see it.
Yeah, okay. I'm not quite sure what's happening there. Hold on, let me try again. I'm going to try loading it from scratch again.
Ah.
Okay, I hope you're seeing it now. Sorry, a bit of a glitch.
Yeah, we can see it now, Adrian.
Okay, thank you. Purpose of this presentation is to set out some background and context to the local plan review process. I'll only be speaking for about 15 minutes, and I'll be covering a quite general level why we have a local plan, something about the current local plan strategy. I'll cover quite briefly the local plan examination inspectors report because that's being considered by committees. Something about the local plan review and update process, and importantly, the role of evidence gathering in that process. And then very briefly, the local development scheme, which is the work programme that we have to produce as part of this process. And I'll obviously, if I can, I will answer questions at the end. There are a number of quite important reasons for having a local plan in place. The main reason is that it provides certainty for everybody involved in the development process about where development is likely to be acceptable and where it's not, and the type of development we would want to support. So it provides a starting point for planning applications. It also helps to guide investment, both private and public, and supports bids for government infrastructure funding. We are currently involved in two funding processes. One is called the HIF, the Housing Investment Fund, which is a fund to help overcome infrastructure constraints on housing sites in particular. And the other one is what's called the MRN process, the Main Road Network process, of which the A28 through to Margate is part of the network, and for which there is a current bid to government being led by KCC. And I'll come back to that a bit later. The local plan is a statutory requirement, but as you can see, there are some good reasons for having a local plan in any event. So just very briefly, this is in very brief terms, the local plan strategy as it is in the draft. That's been through the examination and which is going to committees. We have to produce a key diagram. The idea is to try and set out the strategy so that people can see the reason that we've come to the different decisions. I hope you can see the little red cursor on screen. So if I just very briefly explain some of the things on the map. So some of the constraints include the area around the coast, which is all designated nationally and internationally as a wildlife area. The areas here, the sort of stipple blue, are all flood risk areas. There is a tiny bit in the centre of Margate as well, but obviously the areas out on the Wonson Channel are much more extensive. These green areas here are the green wedges. And it's difficult to show on the key diagram, but obviously we do have a number of conservation areas and we do have about 2,000 listed buildings as well. So there are other things that have to be taken into account. So the strategy broadly has been to look at brownfield sites, including old industrial land, sites within the urban areas, but part of the plan strategy includes urban extensions at Birchington here, Westgate, south of Margate at Hartsdown, Shottenden, around Westwood area here, and just west of Ramsgate, which is the site known as Manston Green. This area here is Manston Business Park, and the brown line is what's known as the inner circuit. So this is a scheme that was put together, again, with KCC's involvement to try to reduce congestion on the existing urban network, to link the new sites, but to link them with Westwood in particular, and Manston Business Park, and also the wider road network. So just quickly on the examination and the inspector's report, the examination hearings completed in July last year, 16 hearing days. We had about 46 pages of questions from the inspectors, which were discussed at that examination. We received the report in March and published in April. The inspectors' main conclusion was that the plan is sound and legally compliant, subject to the modifications they are suggesting. I say suggesting, it's actually a quite strong recommendation, because what they're saying is that without those modifications, the plan is not sound. Having said that, they did support much of the strategy, the housing numbers, the key sites, employment sites, infrastructure, environment policy, tourism policy. So although there are quite a lot of modifications, they are quite technical modifications rather than changing the strategy that's in the plan. As you know, the committee report was considered by Cabinet on the 23rd of April and is due to go to overview and scrutiny panel next week. I thought it might be worth covering very briefly some of the main modifications. So there's a new policy on review of the plan, which is obviously pertinent for this meeting. A new policy on Manston Airport to recognise the DCO process. There's also a change to the trajectory for housing provision. So this reduces the requirement in the first 5 years, but it is balanced by a higher requirement in the later years. So the overall housing requirement doesn't change. They've simply recognised the fact that there are key infrastructure projects that need to come forward before we can start delivering at that higher rate. There are also some changes to the other policies I've mentioned there. They are slightly more minor changes, but in particular, draw your attention to the Gypsy Traveller accommodation. Members will be aware that there's been lots of discussion and debate about that over the last couple of years. And one of the things that the inspectors put in place was a new policy to cover the identified needs. So just quickly on the update itself, members will remember that a couple of years ago, the Secretary of State intervened in our local plan process. And at the end of that process, he sent us a direction letter. And one of the things that we are required to do is complete a review of the local plan within 6 months of its adoption. Now, I appreciate we haven't adopted the plan yet, but 6 months is an incredibly tight timetable to do a review process. And so felt it's worth beginning work now so that we've got that little bit more time to consider the issues. So the purpose of the review is to assess whether a full update of the plan is necessary, or if an update is necessary, what that scope is. And obviously that's the role of this group. So the purpose is to look at the plan as it's adopted and to see what needs updating, what's changing, and how we address those things. The review process doesn't require this group or the council to make instant decisions in that 6 months about exactly how we're going to deal with those issues, simply to understand the scope of them and to explain how we're going to approach them, how we approach addressing those issues. So there are a number of things that the inspectors raised for us to look at in the review. Implications of climate change. There is a policy set out in the local plan, but this is a quite fast-moving agenda, and no doubt we will have to review some of that. Need to look at the provisions of the plan as they relate to Manston Airport. Members will be aware, no doubt, that the DCO decision has been delayed until July, but during the review of the plan, we will need to look at what that decision is and how we respond to it. The third one is really about checking that we've got the right housing requirements against the government's what they call standard methodology. To consider the provision of Gypsy and Traveller sites, which I've briefly covered already, and then to make sure we're compatible with the latest government guidance. So just a couple of things in relation to review. The government guidance says that we need to take into account changing circumstances affecting the area, any relevant changes to national policy, and if the housing need figures change. So some of the things I've just mentioned. There's an interesting piece of guidance that says that we should have proportionate, relevant and up-to-date evidence to justify a decision not to update policies. Now, clearly, if we adopt the plan as anticipated, then clearly the plan is quite up to date, and we will need to look at whether much of that actually needs to change. But officers have already started to just take a very quick view of the policies as they appear in that draft to see which ones are likely to need updating. Obviously, we will bring that to the group for discussion in due course. Part of the other thing that's in guidance is that it says that strategic policies should be prepared over a minimum 15-year period. So that suggests that we may need to extend the plan period beyond 2031 to 2035 or 6 or possibly beyond. Again, it's something for discussion. And then as part of the review process, we have a duty to cooperate. So as we start to develop what we think the scope of an update is, we do need to discuss that with Canterbury, Dover, KCC, Parish and Town Councils, and there are other bodies like Natural England and the Environment Agency, and rather strangely, the Coal Authority, who every time we contact them for consultation tell us they're not interested, but we still have to contact them because they are one of the statutory bodies. Just one other quick slide on the review process. This is just, again, an extract from the guidance. What can we consider when determining whether any of our policies need updating? Housing delivery performance, whether we can show that we've got a 5-year supply of housing land. And those of you who have been on planning committee will no doubt have heard Ian Livingston refer to this on numerous occasions. How our key sites are being delivered, how we are performing at appeals, annual monitoring. So the strategic planning team does a lot of monitoring each year on what development is taking place, housing, employment development, retail, to see what the current trends are and whether sites are being delivered. Changes to higher tier plans. Well, there aren't many higher tier plans than local plans because of the way the system now operates, but clearly people like Natural England, Highways Agency, the South East LEP, and others are producing plans, and obviously we need to be clear that we are sort of working with them as we develop our plans. Plan making activity by other authorities. Well, this is specifically Canterbury and Dover. Canterbury is slightly ahead of us in terms of reviewing their plan, but obviously we do have good contact with our East Kent colleagues, and so we'll need to continue that and share our review work as we go. And we need to look at things like economic changes that potentially could impact on plan viability, and also any other priorities that may change during the period of the plan. There's quite a lot to cover. And as I say, 6 months is quite a tight timescale, and here, that's the reason really why we thought it'd be useful to start a little earlier and start to pull together work on that. I mentioned earlier the importance of evidence, and you can see this quote there from national guidance. Preparation and review of all policies should be underpinned by relevant and up-to-date evidence. So the key things for us in the first instance are to look at the housing numbers through the standard methodology. And we've already commissioned work to begin on that, which we hope could be shared with the group at an early stage. To look again at employment land supply and allocations and retail provision. Again, already having some discussions with KCC about that, because obviously the current circumstances have changed the way people approach retailing. And it's a little early to know whether that's a permanent shift or a temporary one. And I've mentioned there also transport modelling, which KCC are involved with, and what we call a call for sites. So when we know what provision for housing we need to make and employment land, and in our case, traveller sites as well, the general approach is to issue a call for sites to see what land is genuinely available to meet that need. And at the end of this process, we have to produce what's called a local development scheme. It's actually a work programme for the local plan for 3 years. The one that's on the slide there is the one that's currently published. It has to be agreed by Cabinet. And because obviously we've had intervention from the Secretary of State, we need to keep them on board and make sure they're aware when our new local development scheme is published. So that's quite a flying overview. I am more than happy to answer questions if I can. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Adrian. I think that's quite a comprehensive overview. If members want to ask questions, perhaps they could indicate in the text box. I'll start with a couple of questions. I mean, you referred obliquely to the COVID-19 crisis. I mean, obviously there is the potential for that to reshape quite a lot of things in the way that society interacts, and it's something that we're going to have to factor in. And how feasible is that going to be in the short term? Because really people don't know. We just don't know where things are going. And the other thing you might want to expand a bit on is obviously we haven't had the outcome of the Manchester DCO. I think we might get it on July the 10th. That seems to be the suggestion now. But even then, there could be a further period of uncertainty if that's subject to legal challenge, which I think there's quite a lot of noise around. It might be subject to a legal challenge from either side, depending on the outcome. So how is that going to complicate what we're trying to do?
Yeah, yes, thank you, Chair. They are two quite complicating factors. I suppose at the end of this 6 months, all we will be able to say in terms of the local development scheme is that we know that these are issues that we need to address. COVID-19, we hear a lot of discussions about how things will change and what will change and how much it will change. And I think to some extent, we are going to have to wait and see what happens as restrictions are lifted and as people try to resume their lives in a sort of normal way, as it were. But I think it will be something we'll be wanting to speak to MHCLG about, because they will be perfectly aware that this is a big uncertainty for everyone. So I think that's something we just have to keep under review as we go. But you're right, it could cause quite a lot of uncertainty in terms of how we approach certain topics. As far as the DCO is concerned, the 10th of July is what's being touted as a decision. And again, you're quite right, we could be in for a long haul before a final decision is made. From the local plan perspective, obviously, if the DCO is granted, we'll need to start looking at things like air quality, aircraft noise contours, whether there are any transport implications, potentially even housing implications, and public safety zones. So there's quite a lot there if the DCO is granted. If the DCO is not granted, then clearly we will have to consider the future of the site as part of the review. But you're quite right that either decision might be subject to judicial review. So I think we will have to proceed on the basis that whatever comes out of that process, we have an understanding of what we'll need to do.
Okay, thanks. I think if you could stop presenting now, that would it makes it easier for members to see the meeting. See you. Yeah. Thank you. I've got Councillor Garner and then Councillor Fellows.
Thank you. Yeah, I did have one question, but you've actually hit on a couple of things that have made me think of another couple of questions. But my initial question was about the timescale. So we got a 6-month review. Does that mean there's a 6 months from the adoption? So this is like a preamble to the start of that 6-month review.
Yeah, we have to have carried out the review within 6 months of adoption. So by starting early, we've just got a little bit more time to consider the issues. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. And you were talking about COVID-19 and the impact. I mean, this plan is going to be at least a 10-11 year plan. So I assume we ought to be thinking about contingency planning for any future pandemic, which
I mean, there's obviously quite a risk that there would be another one at some stage in the future, and we need to be ready for that.
Yes, I'd agree with that. Certainly the local government information unit, I think it is, has produced some guidance on how planning might start to look at those sorts of issues, what it might mean for public spaces. So yes, you're quite right. In terms of resilience for those kinds of events, that is something we will need to look at as part of that process.
Okay, and sorry, and the last, just coming back to Manston, I guess, yeah, we don't know what the result's going to be. But it can really only go one of the two ways, can't it? Either it's approved or it isn't. So we can start looking at what we would do in each of those options, ready for the decisions made. Right, so we're going down that route, which we've already started, or we're going down the other route, which we've already started. So we don't need to wait until the decision's made before we start planning for it.
Yeah, I think that's quite right. It does give us the opportunity to look at what the implications are either way, and to start to think about how that might affect the plan.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fellows.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Just want to ask about the 6 month. Would there be a grace period from the adoption then before any planning applications that will be submitted by developers on allocated plots? So, I mean, if we decide we want to move plots around or find other plots, will the planning applications be held for 6 months before they're approved? That's my first question.
I don't think we'd be in a position to do that. We have to deal with planning applications in the timescales that we have. I think the issue here is that we have submitted a plan we consider to be sound, and the inspectorate have found it sound. So it would be quite difficult, I think, to row back from the sites that have been allocated because they are sites that the inspectorate have accepted and are recommending that we include in the plan.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, but if we found a brownfield site for 2,000 houses, we can't move 2,000 houses from grade 1 agricultural land onto a brownfield site.
I think the issue will be is when we do the housing numbers, what changes there. So if we need to find additional housing, for example, it may be that whatever other sites we can find would be needed to meet that requirement as well.
Sure.
I think the issue is that because those sites have been through an examination and the inspectors have found them sound, it is quite difficult to sort of come back from that position, really.
Sure. And you said about extending the plan. Obviously, this plan's been, we haven't had a local plan for 9 years. I mean, you're saying in 15 years' time, we might have to have another one. So, I mean, how far can we extend this plan? Could we go to 2040? So we've got 20 years of this plan.
It does say, I think it's 15 years as a minimum, or 15 years is what it should be. So that does give you the opportunity to consider whether actually a longer plan period may be suitable.
Okay.
That is possible. Yes.
I think we probably all hope that the next local plan doesn't take quite as long to prepare us and get through the process as this one.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's been satisfactory to anybody. Councillor Bailey. Can you unmute yourself, Councillor Bailey? It appears not. Can you hear us, Councillor Bailey?
There. I keep losing the drop-down screen. It keeps disappearing and I can't get onto it. My question to Adrian was about the neighbourhood plans. How do they tie in? Is that all part and parcel of the review?
Yes, I mean, what we try to do is to work. Obviously, I think there are 4 neighbourhood plans currently under preparation at different stages. The 2 sets of plans don't have to be completely identical, but clearly it makes sense if we can produce them sort of in parallel, or at least so that the plans aren't sort of supporting each other. So that's what we try to do. I don't know whether we're going to get any more neighbourhood plans, but I know that there are particularly for at the moment, and we are working with those groups as closely as we can in terms of the relationship to the local plan.
Just a question from me then. I mean, can somebody come forward with a neighbourhood plan at any stage?
Yes, they can. It's a bit like the old, when we had county plans, are called structure plans, where they would produce a plan. And obviously, ideally, if you've got a structure plan and then the local plans all followed neatly along, that makes everything very tidy. But it doesn't tend to happen like that. And it's the same with neighbourhood plans. So it's really a case of neighbourhood plans just seeing where the local planning process is at and trying to feed into that. But yes, they could start one at any time. Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Scott. So, Councillor Scott, you need to come out of the chat function, I understand, in order to be able to unmute yourself. Okay, well, it doesn't look like that's happening, Councillor Scott. So, is there any other members who want to ask a question in relation to the presentation?
Only as Mike suggested, could we have a copy of those slides, please?
Yes, of course. Yes, no problem.
Okay. All right then. So then we've got another meeting scheduled, I think. And the next thing to consider really is the work programme and take forward what we might be discussing there. You've got some ideas on that for us, Mr. Verrill.
Mr. Chairman, do I take it that members have just noted the presentation?
Yes. Well, I think if anyone disagrees that they've noted it, then they could indicate now. Thanks, Charles.
Okay, so you have a copy of an outline work programme, I believe. This is only indicative. It's just to give you an idea, really, of how we might cover the ground before we have to submit or publish the LDS. So working back from publishing the LDS in December, hopefully, we are aiming to go to Cabinet in November, and that gives us the opportunity for five meetings of this group in that time. So what we would hope to do over that period is to bring you some of the scoping work we've done in relation to government guidance, bring evidence to you as soon as it becomes available, to talk about what consultation we need to do with neighbouring authorities and others. And so how we do that, and the idea would be to present you with a draft committee report in October that sets out the local development scheme so for your discussion before it went to Cabinet in November. So that's the plan. It is quite a general plan. It's quite flexible. We can certainly move some of those items around, and obviously it gives you as members the opportunity to input your concerns and ideas into that process as we go along. So it's quite a sort of formative process.
Okay, do members have any? I know Councillor Scott wants to come in, and we'll give him an opportunity when we've dealt with this item. But do members have any comments about the work programme for the advisory group? Doesn't look as if they do. Councillor Scott, I know that your question probably relates to the previous item, but in view of the technological issues, I'm quite happy to let you ask it now.
Yeah, many thanks. Appreciate that. Yeah, slight laptop issues, so going on the old phone. It was just really a quick one, and was back on the last item. It was just in relation to, and apologies if it isn't relevant for this particular meeting, but the infrastructural side of things, especially with Southern Water. I mean, I would just speak for my ward specifically, and I don't know if that's the dumb thing to do, but I mean, apparently the drainage side of things, Southern Water have said on occasions that it's not something they can actually accommodate, and we have been known to suffer some drought. So, I mean, that was just something that I sort of wanted to bring to the table for this particular discussion.
Well, I'll tell you what happened through the local plan process that we've just sort of been through in terms of the examination. We had to produce an infrastructure delivery plan, which is on the website, and I can certainly give you a link to that at some point if you're interested. And that tries to cover everything. So it covers utilities, highways, it covers education, it covers health. So what is identified in there is what are considered to be the needs, and that's information that's come from those bodies directly. So they certainly haven't flagged to us through the process that there's a water supply issue. We know that there are certain sites that have got slightly tricky sewerage connection issues that need to be resolved, but they haven't suggested to us that there's an issue in terms of water supply. Does that answer your question?
It does for the time being, so many thanks on that one. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, now do members have any questions about the work plan, any comments about the work plan, or are we happy to adopt that and move forward? Doesn't look like anyone has any comments at this stage. Okay, so do we need to note that report, Charles?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think it's noting the web.
Okay, so that report is noted unless anybody dissents, and I think that concludes this evening's meeting. So thanks very much for everyone for attending.
Thanks, Rick.